Alright, sorry about this. I meant to get this video out yesterday, but in this video I'm going to be going a little bit more into layout and generally layout design. So, to give a few visual examples to what layout's job entirely is, I have a quick section from the spring Open Movie production report and the spring Open Movie showreel. So first, this is from the layout of the scene, and you can see that a lot of these assets are just blocked in or just there to be initial visual representations. And if I back up a few frames, you can see that the background behind the character has pretty much no added objects or complexity. You can see that the characters are just sliding along the ground here, and that's also part of the timing from layout. This will be based on timing from the scenes and all that. You can see that this has initial camera movement as well. That'll be part of layout as well. Her face kind of freaks me out in this. I'm gonna be honest. It just hits that uncanny valley in the previews. But you can see that characters just slide around, and they look sort of spectacular. In the background, once again, you don't see pretty much any environmental detail, or even on the ground here. As you can see here, this area is along a mountaintop, but a lot of these models are just stand-in or previs stuff. I would like to particularly note that there's a strong emphasis, or I would ask you to see the strong emphasis on scale relations to the character. So you can see that this small girl character, her type of dog is really small. This is like a Scottish Terrier, I believe. And her size is proportional to this fence that's just made of primitives, scaled, joined, and probably renamed. You can see that these rocks here are just stand-in. They probably just went into sculpture mode, which I'll show in a few minutes if you haven't explored already, and just drag them out. And, a couple of other really basic modeling stuff. But a lot of the job of layout, initially at least, is to worry about the form of the scene and the form of the environment. And layout has the job of environmental modeling as well. Not modeling all the environmental assets such as leaves, trees, rocks, grass, and all that sort of stuff, but just putting it into the scene. There are lots of different ways of doing that are quite easy and, I'm gonna admit, pretty fun. Layout has a fun job. And, of course, if you're not doing external environments, you're doing internal environments, the same thing applies. You're just placing assets in and around. Personally, we humans like sort of asymmetrical beauty, and I'll probably put out another video about my thoughts on thoughts or concepts that I've used in environmental modeling and in world building through placement of items, not just the But that's a lot of stuff that the design team worries about. These first few clips are a little bit misleading. So you can see the block-in terrain right here. A lot of this stuff was created, probably first with the Ant add-on, which I'll be showing you, another noise tool landscape add-on. And then probably initially sculpted and more displacement maps added. You can see that there's a previs here for, generally this area is clouds. As you zoom in, of course, there's more detail to the environments, but you won't be worrying about that right now. If we need these sort of environments with lots of mountains and rocks and textures like that, I can show you a multitude of ways that I personally would go about it. Anyway, as we zoom in on this area, you can see that there are different passes. So after this comes in, you can see blockout meshes for some of the trees down here, and as more are added, you can see that it was changed slightly from where that previous shot was. And of course, these large boulders were added, stuff like that. Small individual trees, rocks, pieces, etc., etc. And you can see how going through different layers and having texturing go with the work and everything else creates a nice environment. This environmental modeling and shading is a little bit deceptive, and it goes by very quick. You can see first the initial shape of the environment. This was probably either randomly generated or partially randomly generated and sculpted, both through literal Blender sculpting tools or sculpted with displacements and vertex groups, and then probably modeled a bit as well for areas that they wanted to do differently. But this is kind of deceptive in that you see all this moss and all this other small items being added around such a complex texture. But in fact, these models, or this environmental model, is quite straightforward. A lot of these models were procedurally placed, so you just, if I was doing this, I would just go in here and start painting all of these models and using a particle system, and I'll show you how to do that. There's also the scatter add-on, which is paid, but can greatly improve the speed at which somebody models an environment like this, or rather places assets within the environment like this. There's maybe 2 variations of the moss here, and they're both randomly placed within the same particle system. And of course you can see all the leaves and other small items are placed around. And then it's kind of hard to see, but you see a texture on top here, and based on the angle of the model, or the angle of the geometry, it just gradiates between the 2 textures. So you can see right here, there's texture A, and then as it becomes overhang, there's a different texture here. There are also ways that you can manually paint in between textures and do masks and that sort of stuff. But that's later on. I won't be going over all of this stuff in this video, just the basics of it. And from there, you can see that rocks were added to the scene. And then from there, you can see that all of the roots of the trees have been added to the scene. Trees fly down from the sky, sort of connect. This area is a dark scene, so not a lot of attention was really put to matching absolutely everything. But you can see that some of these assets are the same, or variations on each other, very simple variations. So there are maybe 3 or 4 different, or 5 different roots that hang down from a side piece here, but all of these are duplicated around the scene. So this same model right here is probably used around here. And there are different ways that you can use displacement, shrink wrap modifiers, or armatures in order to place one asset down on a scene and have it wrap around items. However, I'll get to that as needed. And of course, all of these rocks, there are maybe 10 different rocks at the very most, and these are all just laid out. Now, what I'm showing you in this area is a preview into later Layout's job, in placing all of the assets in the scene. Initially, however, these will all just be random bits and pieces of mesh that you throw in to make everything look right and to compose the scene and to get a feel for the scene and environment. Even if it's inside, you'll be just placing large cubes for, say, desks, and maybe cutting out the undersides of cubes to show that they're actual desks and to give a variation of visual weight. But it's all stuff that's just whatever you can do to get it done. And of course, you can see more sticks were added, there was a pass of these icicle assets, and there are maybe 5 different icicle assets, all using the same, maybe 1 or 2 shaders, and there's probably a couple of sliders for the animators, but you know, that's animation work, and that's texturing work. And then you can see that the placement of all these little ferns really adds to the depth of the scene. And these ferns were probably not placed manually, they were probably placed with a particle system like I said before. And then maybe 5 or 6 of them within a given area, were placed manually to give more character to them. And then you can see here that everything has blockout meshes, or stand-in meshes, to make the viewing and animating of the character a lot faster. So your blockouts will probably look a lot more like this, except with less detail. You're just trying to get ideas across. And once again, you can see different layers upon layers and layers. And just to emphasize, let me back up a moment, just to emphasize how few assets are actually needed to make a really complex scene like this. Once again, maybe 10 rock variations, all scaled at different sizes, maybe 5 pebble variations. But the same stick is used about 6 times in this area, or in this scene, or in this shot, rather. And it may have been used more, and I just don't realize it. This stick, this stick, this stick, looks like this stick, and this one of these sticks are all the same exact stick. It's just that with layers of complexity and layers of placing assets, that you get a more complex scene. And the more assets are added, the more your eye doesn't focus on any one of them, and so the repetition of detail isn't noticed as much. And it also helps that repetition of detail, as long as they're placed, sized differently, and rotated differently, can actually tie a scene together. So I'll just, so you can see the fern pass there, the icicle pass, the giant rock coming down from the sky, and once again, your blockout will look more like this. Anyway, I'll make sure to link these two in the description. Just to give another example for an interior, something like a diner, all of these meshes of all the chairs would probably be duplicated. And there would probably be a variation of material if one is more dirty than the other, or has a coffee stain or something like that. However, in the blockout stage, you don't have to worry about modeling, or rather, the finished models or the finished rendering. All you do is slap down a cylinder and a cylinder underneath it, throw an array modifier on that, and you've got a row of chairs. Same thing for the booths and all that sort of stuff. Later layout, you'll be doing a very similar thing in just placing down all of the linked assets. And by the way, it's completely fine as far as I can tell, I'm still doing testing, to create instances of linked assets without breaking scenes. So you don't have to go in and relink the same asset again and again and again. I'm also going to be showing or sending you a add-on called Simple Asset Manager. It's free, of course. That gives you a visual preview of what the assets that you're placing will be, along with sorting by categories and all that sort of stuff. But that's, once again, for later layout. Anyway, how does this relate back to this simple scene? Well, other than the omnipresent cube that we all worship, before we get into it, there are a couple of add-ons I would like to enable. And I'm probably going to split this into multiple videos so that this is easier to digest. So in this video, I'll just go over the rest of the add-ons. Then in the next, I'll go into environmental modeling and the procedural side of that. And it's pretty darn simple at the basic level, and so it becomes really, really fun. And it becomes all about the concepts and how you're doing the environment. Anyway, so going up to Edit, Preferences. So, Probably the first one that I have enabled is Proxify. I'll link that in the description below, but just for a visual example of what it does, I'll go over to the, go over to this page. So it's creating a low resolution mesh that can then be used in place of a finished model for animating or all that sort of stuff. They're very similar to the proxy meshes used in there. And you can see here that it's just cubes and very basic strings or very basic geometry. You don't have to worry about actually creating this because later on all these assets will be provided to you. However, I'll show you how to create basic trees that'll give you a better blockout. Anyway, I'll make sure to link that in the download. The next one that I have enabled is Add Curve, and this is I'm going to add sapling tree gen. You can also enable ivy gen. Ivy gen is a cool little add-on that's for generating ivy in a more procedural way. And then I've got a few other things enabled, but you don't have to worry about them as much. Add extra curve objects, that's for knots and braids and other stuff that just are presets. If I go up here to the categories again and go to Add Mesh, I've enabled, most importantly, Ant Landscape. You can also enable Archie Mesh, play around with that so that you can generate rooms, doors, windows, and everything else like that very quickly. However, you won't really need as much detail as Archie Mesh gives you. You can literally just throw in stuff. And then lastly, here's Simple Asset Manager. I'll also make sure to link this in the description, but it won't matter for this tutorial. Extra stuff you can always look into and enable these extra mesh items, but they aren't really important to what we're doing. Anyway, with those enabled, I'm just going to go down here, make sure that they're saved by pressing Save Preferences. You can see that there's auto-save preferences, but at times, or I believe when you don't save the scene, it doesn't save. Anyway, if you are in a different area and you haven't figured it out already, you may have been thrown to this interface screen. So if you just go down to Add-ons, you can see this entire interface. My apologies for not putting that at the start of opening Blender Preferences. So now I'm free to close this and we can start. First thing I'll probably do will be deleting this cube, of course. And I would like to probably first go over environmental terrain. That'll be in the next video, just so I can make this easier for everybody to consume.